Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dog Walk. That sound is unfortunately familiar to many of us. And while it's the a topic of jokes and humor and worse relationship issues, unfortunately, it is not well recognized to be a health issue. And hence, most of us don't pay any attention to it unless the sound is so annoying to the partner or to the spouse that it forces us to seek some kind of medical attention about. And so today we will take up this topic because in reality, snoring can be a red flag. And it can be a red flag for something serious, something as serious as heart disease and stroke. So before we get too far into that, let's start at the basics. What exactly is snoring? Why does it occur? Why does it occur to only some of us and not to others? And when should we get concerned? Let's start with a scenario, a very common scenario that plays out all the time. The wife gently or sometimes not so gently tries to wake up the husband, maybe a little elbow to the chest. And the husband wakes up and says, "What? What happened?" And she says, "Will you stop that?" And he says, "Stop what?" And she says, "Well, your snoring is driving me nuts." And he says, "What snoring? What noise? I don't hear myself snore." Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Happens all the time. Which brings up this issue of why do we snore? And why do we snore in sleep? Have you ever heard anyone snore when they're awake? Even the loudest of snorers doesn't snore when he is awake or she's awake. So when we are awake, we have muscles in the throat, one in particular called genioglossus. Let's call him GG for short. GG has one role, and it's an important one. GG's role is to work on the air passageway and stretch it, keep it open, make sure that the airflow is smooth and the airflow is quiet. Now, you have a long day, you've been hard at work, you have a heavy meal, you're tired, your body wants to go to sleep. And as the body goes to sleep, all the body muscles, head to toe, they relax. They want to get some rest too. And so does poor Mr. Gigi. He's been working hard all day. He deserves to get some rest. And so, what happens when Mr. Gigi takes rest? The air passageway starts to close. No longer is it being stretched open. Now the airway starts to close off. And what happens when air is blowing through a narrowed passageway? Those of us who play a wind instrument like a trombone or a saxophone or a flute will know this. It causes noise, it causes vibration, and that is precisely what snoring is. Snoring is the orchestra that is produced when air that you're breathing is going through a narrowed air passageway. And the quality of the snoring, and this is why no two snorers will sound alike. The quality of the snoring, the sound that is produced, is based on the vibration of the structures in the back of the throat, primarily the uvula. The uvula is that curtain that, if you open your mouth and look in the mirror, you can see that curtain hanging down the back of the throat. So the uvula and all the structures around it, that is really what is vibrating and causing that noise, the timbre of snoring. And so now that we kind of have a good understanding of what snoring is and what that sound is, we can move on to a question that occurs to many of us, particularly those of us who snore or the family members of those who snore, which is why am I snoring? What is it about me that makes me snore while somebody else is able to sleep with no noise at all. So let's break it down simply into what are the main causes of snoring. First and foremost, good old genes, the hand me downs. So if your dad or mom snored, very, very likely you do. And if you do, chances are virtually every sibling, every brother and sister in that family will also snore at a particular age. And that is because of the craniofacial structures, the particular jaw structure, the particular neck structure, how the anatomy is positioned. Number two, age. Yes, when we are younger, our air passageway, just like the rest of our body, tends to be more rigid. And as we age, our skin maybe starts to get a little bit more wrinkly. Things start to become generally more flaccid. And the air passageway is no exception. It tends to become more collapsible. It needs that Genie Glosses, Mr. Gigi, to keep working and keeping that air passageway open. Number three is gender. Men, in particular, are more at risk for snoring and start snoring much earlier. Men typically will end up snoring roughly around age 40, somewhere after age 35 is when we start to see it. Women are protected because of the female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. They have a protective effect of making sure that the airway stays more open. But as soon as they hit that dreaded menopause, that is when they lose that hormonal protection. And so, women, particularly around menopause or after menopause, start getting sleep issues. And oftentimes, sleep apnea is the role. They start snoring, and very often they just associate sleep problems with menopause itself without recognizing that these are potentially because of sleep apnea and snoring. And we will go into that in subsequent videos in a lot more detail. And then finally, is weight. As we age, unfortunately for most of us, comes with weight issues. And as we start putting on more weight, particularly when we start putting on weight in the neck, as our neck circumference goes above 17 inches, for example, virtually everybody with that kind of a large neck will be snoring. So if your collar size is 17, you don't even have to ask anyone. Very, very likely that you're going to be snoring, and your snoring is going to be loud, and it potentially could be worrisome about a medical condition. Well, now some of you are thinking, well, I do know of a kid who's snoring, or a kid in your own family is snoring. So that doesn't make sense when you're saying snoring mainly occurs in later in life or with aging. So here is where, as parents, I want you to listen up, particularly if you have a child who snores regularly. If your child is snoring every night, whenever they fall asleep, they're snoring, or they are sleeping with their mouth open and you can clearly hear the sound of snoring, that is a danger signal. Snoring is abnormal in kids and generally occurs in kids because of enlargement of tonsils and adenoids. These are lymph tissues that are there in the back of the throat. Tonsils is right behind the tongue, and adenoids are in the back passageway behind the nose. And those, when they start enlarging, they block that air passageway and contribute to that air passageway getting narrow, and that noise of snoring that is occurring is a sign that this child is not getting oxygen. And particularly for children, that is dangerous because it leads to problems with intellectual development. Many kids who snore end up with ADHD, attention deficit disorders, and a lot of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD but don't get diagnosed with sleep apnea or with snoring, unfortunately, may suffer for a long time until we pick up on exactly what is going on. So if your kid is snoring very regularly, definitely needs to get checked into, and I'll try to cover this in much more detail in subsequent in a subsequent video exclusively about kids and snoring. So we covered what happens with snoring, why does snoring occur, what is what makes people to be at risk of snoring, and we covered what happens with when kids are snoring or why some kids snore. So in a subsequent video, what I will dive more into is some myths about snoring, and then more importantly, we will start talking about when should we be concerned about snoring as a medical condition, and what are some of the warning signs, and what exactly are a whole range of health implications that occur with that. So if you know someone who snores or have a family member that you have been concerned about who is snoring, this is definitely something that you don't want to miss. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to share this video with anyone that you think may be snoring and deserves to really get more information about it. And I'll be back very soon with another episode of Doc Walk where we will cover sleep apnea and snoring in much more detail.